Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm happy to welcome you to this insightful discussion about upcoming financial mandates that you need to know about. My name is Cassandra, and I'm the Interim Marketing Manager here at Precise ParkLink, and I'm happy to be here with you today as your moderator. Joining me today is also Cynthia Bruce, Senior Proposal Writer here at Precise ParkLink, as well as Doug Hayden, Vice President of Client Solutions at Moneris, which is a leader in technology-enabled debit and credit card processing solutions in Canada. So there are a few things I would like to mention before we get started. We will be accepting questions in the chat that we will be addressing at the end of today's webinar during a live Q&A session. So be sure to enter your questions as well as who you are addressing it to in the chat. So on the agenda for today, we will be starting off with a deep dive into Canada's cashless transition and what your parking provider should already be offering you. Then we will touch on past rules and mandates before making our way into upcoming financial compliance mandates and how this will impact your organization overall. Then we will discuss several solution upgrade considerations that will help you prepare for the future and the questions you should be asking your parking provider to guarantee continued success. And as mentioned earlier, we'll finish the webinar with a live Q&A. And if you enjoyed the webinar and think we should continue hosting educational events virtually, we encourage you to leave us a Google star rating. You can do so by scanning the QR code on the screen. We will have the screen up at the end of the webinar again, so you can scan the QR code and leave us that Google star rating. And just letting you all know that we do plan to host both virtual and in-person educational events this year, just to ensure our partners and clients are ahead of the curve. So I'll pass it on to Cynthia to take it from here.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. Hi, everybody. I want to take a minute. Thank you all so much for taking a bit of time out of your day today to join us for this super exciting talk about financial mandates. Okay, well, maybe not super exciting, except Doug. I think Doug is probably going to find this really exciting. But anyways, I think we can agree that if not exciting, they are very important. So you're probably expecting another piece of commentary that talks about how COVID did it, COVID impacted it, COVID changed it. And I'm not going to disappoint you. The truth is that we've experienced it firsthand. Parking owners and operators are changing their payment technology solutions so they can be better aligned with the demands of their parking patrons. In fact, COVID changed how people buy so much that clients like international airports have decided to move their entire operation to cashless operations. The mandates that Doug is going to talk about a little bit later are critical in light of these changes. For me, I am simply going to focus on some of the trends and changes that we're observing in the world of parking and what some of those impacts might be. So one thing that our friends at Moneris are really good at, other than obviously safely processing millions of transactions every year, is research. And we're talking about research in the marketplace, research about shopping and spending behaviors, and research around the psychology of buyers. One of these key pieces of research has demonstrated that Canadians are actually on a fast track to becoming a cashless society. Estimates are accounting for a 70% drop in cash-based transactions over the next 7 years, I think. So think about it. Like, how were you buying 10 years ago or even 20 years ago? Do you ever think there could be a time in your lifetime where physical cash and coin are no longer predominant ways to pay? Did you ever really think that what we were watching in Star Trek was going to be our future? I know I didn't. Parking patrons have demonstrated a clear preference for touchless transactions and touchless payment solutions. The increase in demand and the use of mobile payment solutions in both gated and non-gated parking operations keeps rising. And the amount of money that we're seeing and collecting in coin and banknote vaults is dropping. So parking patrons, next slide. Thanks. So parking patrons, their payment patterns, they've been noticeably changing since 2020. Today, it's crystal clear. They expect to have a variety of cashless and contactless payment types that are made available to them, no matter where they happen to be parking. For us here at Precise ParkLink, we have a team of R&D engineers in-house. We've got developers, we've got programmers, we've got designers, and they've been developing payment technologies for over a decade now. We can go to the next slide, please. So there's been a big push for rapid change since early 2020, as everybody knows. And our clients were fortunate. Our R&D team, they've already been working on designing and developing contactless solutions for all of our parking technologies. And they were actually also working on bringing some net new ones to market, like being able to pay with a mobile device in a gated parking lot. So while the focus and the push has certainly been on touchless technology, we've been observing that there's still a need for certain sites and certain types of sites to keep accepting coin and banknotes as forms of payments. So what we do is that we work closely with our clients when they're taking a closer look at their operations to see if the timing is right for them to start making that change towards cashless parking operations. There are a lot of benefits to it, but there's going to be some drawbacks too, and it's about finding that balance. So reaching that critical tipping point is going to happen at different times across different sectors, different cities, different towns, and different populations across Canada. And as parking operators and our owners, we all need to be ready for when that time comes. Next slide. Great. Thank you. So some of the things that we believe the parking owners and operators should be looking for and considering when it's time to evaluate their parking technology and their parking provider are, and these are the three things that we feel like are really important pieces of that puzzle. And, CSAE audits, PCI compliance, but PCI compliance, not only at the equipment and the technology and the software offering level, but for the provider themselves. And of course, Doug is going to touch on it in a little bit, EMV certified transaction processing. And everybody knows about this. This is the big thing right now. Let's be honest, your organization is processing thousands and thousands of parking transactions every year. This is translating into tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. We think that it's really critical that you protect your organization and your parking patrons' money with the best technology and processes. So we'll touch a little bit on that first one, PCI. So as we expect that you probably know, payment card industry some years ago established a set of 12 data security standard requirements to help ensure the security of credit card transactions within the framework of the payment industry. The requirements cover things like firewalls, password guidelines, how we protect and store cardholder data, encryption, who has access to what, things like that. Another component of PCI compliance that probably everybody's familiar with is levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Most people don't know what they mean. And really all they are is an indication of the amount of transactions or the value of funds that an organization processes in a year. Each level is obviously going to be subject to its own set of requirements that an organization is going to have to meet in order to be able to attain and maintain that PCI compliance. The second piece that we were looking at was EMV certified transactions. Thank you. The EMV certification, that's the current standard for technology that processes card payments today. So, the old dip readers, we're not using them anymore. We've really moved towards this whole chip and pin technology because the chip in the credit cards and the debit cards has been developed specifically to help reduce fraud and create additional security for everybody involved. And that third piece of the puzzle for us is CSAE audits. So CSAE 3416 audits are not something that everybody's familiar with, but we think it's really important. We think that they should be. These are, within the parking industry, completely voluntary. I can't speak to any other industry, I don't know. The purpose of the audit is really just about making sure that the cash handling procedures are following strict guidelines and strict protocols, and that they meet some of the highest standards that are available. It's really about making sure that the parking firm that you partner with is handling cash in the best ways possible. A couple more slides and I'll turn this over to Doug. So when we're talking about the financial services that our parking providers should be offering, again, in my opinion, really, I think we should be providing our clients with all the correct and current payment technologies, but I think we should be providing them with a really wide range of supporting financial services as well. The list on this slide is some of the services and reports parking owners and operators should be looking for and should be expecting. We encourage clients to look for new parking technology and services, and in doing so, making sure you visit the premises, you visit the offices, you visit sites, Visit plants in the warehouses if they're available, visit the customer service centers, really understand the companies that you're engaging with, understand what makes them tick. Treat it as an interview. You're going to be partnered with your parking technology provider for years, and it needs to be a really good and a really close and really trustworthy relationship. And you need to understand the full scope of services and processes that they can offer you. So like anything else, it's important to stay up to date. So when we consider the impact of financial mandates, we really can't overstate its importance. So my partner, Doug, he is going to talk us through some of the key mandates now and help make sense of the most important what, whys, and hows.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. And just for clarity, I do not find this exciting, but I do find it essential. So my name is Doug Hatton. I head up the client solutions and integrations team at Moneris. And I'm going to walk you through some of the payment mandates and why they are so important to your business. The one question is always out there is, why are there so many mandates? And the reality is the payment ecosystem is very complex. There are so many events that happen from the time somebody taps their card or insets their card and gets their puts in their PIN. You get back the authorization and it comes back to the card. Then you want to get your money at the end of the day. So there's a whole cycle of settlement that has to go on to get your funds moved through all the different systems and end up in your bank account. So with all of these systems, we have to have high reliability because we always want to have payments there. We got to have high security because there's a lot of important data going back and forth. We got to control the fraud that can go on. And, there's getting more and more fraud vectors every day. So controlling that's very important. And then the biggest one really is about interoperability. So you have different banks and organizations issuing cards, you have different types of readers. So making sure that all these things actually work together is a very big job in the payment world. And so a lot of these mandates that are there are to make sure that all of these things can stay in sync. All right, so the next slide. This is just a disclaimer that gets me out of trouble if I say something wrong, so we can skip it. So there are an awful lot of card brand mandates out there, and I'm not going to dive into the deep details of them today, but on Moneris's website, you can go and find the details of all the different compliance mandates. So if there's things I want to talk about today that you want to find a bit more on, go to our website and you can get more information. So I'm going to start with a bit of reviewing the history of the mandates and really talk about how things have evolved. A lot of this has to do with the introduction of EMV and the complexity that EMV brought into it. So I'm going to go through some of the past really to show that these mandates have been there and evolving over the last 10, 15 years and that we're going to have more. They're never going to go away. So the next slide, please. So the first one that came out, and this goes back quite a while, but when we introduced EMV into the world, there was a liability shift that came with it. And this liability shift was to drive people to update their equipment and make sure they could actually accept EMV cards. So when we started, everybody had a standard magstripe card, and as cards started to get issued into the market, we had to upgrade to EMV. So what this did was push the liability to the merchant so that if you didn't have an EMV enabled terminal and there was fraud onto it, that became the merchant's liability. Thus, it incented merchants to upgrade to EMV. Okay, next. With Interact, similar thing. Interact started issuing cards, and to encourage the acceptance of the cards at the Interact terminals and make sure that they're all up to date, Interact had these mandates, so starting in 2012, going up to 2016. So they forced it, and it is a bit of a balancing act because cards had to be issued first. You got to have them in your customers' hands before the terminals could accept them, but at the same time, you had to get the terminals up to there. So Interact also had their mandates. Then along came contactless. So we all got used to putting our cards in the devices and entering our PINs, and then contactless came along. So with contactless, there was also an evolution that started. So the first cards that came out were magstripe based contactless. So the data that came out of the cards when you tapped was looking much like a magstripe piece of data. That then evolved to the EMV standards so that there's more security on the contactless tap. So one of the things to, again, drive adoption is interrate change gets changed by the issuing cards, by the brands. And what it does is the interchange rates reflect the risk that's associated with taking that transaction. So as you get more secure transactions, the price goes down, or as you have less secure transactions, such as an MSD contactless, the price went up. So with MasterCard, the price went up 30 basis points on average if you were processing an MSD transaction. So that's a bit of the history. I'm going to walk you through what's coming down the pipeline, what's currently in play for mandates. Let's skip to the first MasterCard one next. So MasterCard is retiring the MSD support in the functions. So they are forcing and making sure that everybody actually can accept an EMV contactless transactions at the terminal. So the mandates that are around that one are October of last year. All new contactless enabled terminals must only support EMV. So that means that as we roll out new solutions, you have to be at the new standard. And then by April of this year, all the contactless solutions that are out there must only support EMV. So they're very much pushing to get to that standard. And again, interoperability being such an important part of this. So Visa follows. Their announcement was that by October of last year, all terminals must support it. And again, they have the mandate that all terminals must support EMV transactions for contactless, whether it's attended or unattended. So what Visa is doing to drive adoption is they're going to put a that is a MSD transaction. So you'll start to see that as of October of this year, there will be a 15-cent US fee that'll be added to transactions if your terminals do not support EMV. So the financial incentive is there to make sure the terminals get upgraded. Looking at online, there's also requirements coming in when you're doing recurring billing. So MasterCard has a new set of rules to make sure that the chargebacks and disputes for recurring billing are reduced. These become very expensive to everybody once you start when you start getting chargebacks or people calling with disputes. It costs the whole ecosystem, including the merchants, time and effort to make sure that you're getting the data on it. So new rules came in last year, and I would refer you back to the Moneris website if you want to get into the details of all of those things. So there's a couple other mandates that are coming down the path that I just wanted to point out. So with Interact has come out with a new mandate to make sure that the keys that are used in the devices to secure the data when it's transmitted from the terminals back to the hosts are updated to triple DES, which is the newest, well, not the newest standard, but it's a new standard for Interact on making sure the data is secured. So as of last November, new devices must support double length keys. And then the more important date is by November 1st, 2025, all the devices in the field must have been upgraded to be able to support this new key scheme. So what that means is that, old legacy things that are out there, Interact is going to mandate that those are upgraded by 2025. Seems like a long way away, but it's not really. I mean, it's 2.5 years That's not a lot of time in the point of sale world and the equipment world to make sure that things get done and upgraded. The other interesting one that started last year was, for the first time ever, PCI has mandated the retirement of devices out of the field. So as of December of last year, basically PCI 1.x and previous standards that were there before they had the formal PTS standard, those had to be retired out of the field. So again, getting rid of old equipment, maybe not as secure, certainly not compliant probably to the latest standards. So this mandate was required. Processing had to stop on these devices as of December 31st. Looking forward, there's a bit more of a runway for the next retirement. So we're looking at 2027 as the next one. But it is something that's saying that the card brands are going to require devices to be kept current and really retire when they've gone past their best before date. So how are they going to impact you? So terminals do have a life cycle, and what you have to be aware is that they can't be out there forever. There was a time in this industry where devices could be out for 15 years, but that is no longer. So what's going to happen is the legacy terminals are not going to be able to comply with the new mandates, or most unlikely will be unable to comply to them, which is going to impact your ability to do processing, and it's going to bring new fees into it. So you may end up with a terminal that is obsolete and just can't do something, or you're just going to start paying a lot more for your processing. So as you go through this, and I think as Cynthia's pointed out, is that you need to make sure that your provider is getting you the latest and greatest so that you can stay processing transactions. There is some benefit to you. So you have some cost savings. You can avoid fees. So by making sure that you're staying compliant, you aren't going to get the non-compliance fees out of it, and the higher interchange rates that go with it. Also, you look at minimizing your fraud liability risk. So as these new devices come out and with the new standards, the liability on fraud gets reduced. So therefore the impact on your business is there, that you're not trying to deal with fraud or having fraudulent transactions that you're just completely looking, you would lose out in your business. The other one that is interesting as you go forward is PCI implementation scope. So PCI continuously gets tougher, more stringent every year. And this is necessary to keep up with the fraudsters and the people that are trying to crack into the systems. So the newer solutions have opportunity to reduce the PCI scope that's in your systems, keep the payment data out of your business systems, make them stay inside the payment system, and really reduce the impact when you have to do a PCI assessment by showing that it's not getting into your business side of your computers, et cetera. So a little bit of data on what was found during the pandemic, and this is a little bit couple years old, but it's very relevant and the trend is still there. What's very interesting with this is that during COVID, consumers have shifted how they want to pay. So we saw contactless payments go up quite a bit. And the reason being, people didn't want to touch terminals, et cetera, but it's created a new habit for the consumers. I think everybody's pretty reluctant to now to have to put your PIN in, just as a convenience factor. So there's definitely a growth in contactless. Card on file, same thing. We can process transactions. Moving to digital wallets, so paying with your phone, being able to tap with your phone or do in apps through your phone. And just generally the trend is towards new and innovative payment solutions, which is one of the reasons that equipment has to get updated. So a lot of the old equipment that was out there, wasn't set up to do some of the new things that are coming down potentially into the market, like QR codes and QR reading and stuff that are on the horizon. To be able to do that, you need new equipment. So there's some interesting trends with consumers that will benefit you with newer equipment. So when you're going to upgrade, there's a few things that you really should look at when you look at new systems. Let's jump to the next one. So the first thing to look at is integration. This is something that's also evolved a lot in the payment industry, as it has across most of technology platforms in the world today. So years ago, doing full integrations into a payment host was a very laborious thing. There's a lot of certifications that had to go into it. So we're moving towards API-based integrations, makes it simpler and quicker to get the integrations done. Pre-validated EMV solutions are very important to look at so that you're not trying to validate EMV yourself. You get a solution that comes from a vendor that has already got the EMV done and will be staying compliant as you go forward. Things like semi-integrated or IP cloud solutions, again, that makes your integration just so much easier. You're basically asking for a payment to be done, as opposed to trying to go through all the complexities of the back and forth between the hosts, and that gets taken care of it. Another interesting one that is getting more momentum now is device management. There's actually more push from card brands on making sure that these devices can be managed in the field, and especially remote unattended devices, that when there is something that has to be upgraded onto it, the ability to get to those devices and effectively and efficiently upgrade them is something that's got the attention of the card brands, because we have gone through a lot of issues in the past several years where things had to be upgraded and these devices weren't accessible. They required, feet on the street to go to a device. So there's a big push from the card brands onto that. And again, looking at your PCI compliance, what does that solution do for you to make sure that PCI and cardholder data stays out of your business systems? Fraud management is another very important aspect. So a lot of this is focused on e-commerce, and the attacks that come into e-commerce on card testing, and fraudsters trying to find out if cards are valid or not before they either use them on your system or somewhere else. But there are fees coming back from card brands that if card testing is happening through your system, that you're going to get fees charged back to you because your system's being used as the conduit for fraud. So some of the things you need to look for is looking for this card prevention on your systems. Velocity controls, how often is a card coming through? How can you identify that cards are being tested? And in Moneris's world, we have put in some blocking onto certain bins that if we see what looks like an attack vector on a bin coming into us or a card coming into us, we will block that preemptively before it gets to the card brands and protect you from getting the fees that would be charged onto that. Great, next. 3D Secure 2.x. So this is the newest standard that has come out for e-com. What this does is lets you shift the liability and the fraud back to the issuer. So if you use a 3D Secure solution that actually goes and validates it, then if there is fraud, then it is on the issuer and not on the merchant for this. And what this has done is we've all experienced in the past the go online and, oh, please go and remember a password, or please enter your secret MasterCard code or something like that, which nobody remembered, nobody used. Personally, I reset my password every time because it was such a rare occurrence that I used it. But what 3DS does is it characterizes the transaction and the user, and basically it does a assessment of the fraud risk against that. And with that assessment, it provides back where they think the risk might be into it. You can accept that and you get a good number. You go, look, this looks like a good transaction. I'm happy to get it through. We all want our transactions to go through. right? We don't want transactions blocked if they're legit, but we want to block the fraudulent ones. So 3DS is there to help do that, and again, shift the liability back to the card brands instead of on the merchant. And then going back into the PCI and data protection, again, it's something that is very important these days. A lot of the attacks in the past where data would be exposed into a retail system, maybe stored on a computer, or somebody could go in and change a setting and turn off encryption. But there's really two versions of encryption that are out there today. There's an E to E, which means it's endpoint to endpoint. So the data is encrypted in the PIN pad. It stays encrypted until it gets to the payment host, so nobody sees the data. The second higher level of this is actually a P2PE certified solution. And what this same type of encryption from the PIN pad to the device or to the host, but what it adds into it is a full end-to-end management of the devices. And there's a bunch of processes that have to go with it to make sure when the device is installed, it's a legitimate device. It is the device that's supposed to be there, and nobody has fraudulently slipped the device into it or diverted a device to the wrong location. This comes with an official PCI certification, which is significant when you're trying to do your certification. And again, as Cynthia pointed out, there's different levels on different merchants depending on your processing volumes, but it certainly helps when you do it. And again, both help you reduce your PCI scope and assessment. The official one just gives you a little bit more assurance when you're talking to your QSAs. So the main takeaways from all this exciting on compliance is, these do reflect the payment landscape and where the payment world is going. And getting to best practices is very important. So falling behind on compliance is never a good thing. Eventually you're going to catch up. So staying as current as you can is very important. Legacy devices will be retired. They can't stay out there forever. And bringing them forward into the new modern world, there's a lot of benefits coming out. And I would say actually in the last while, there's even more benefits coming in. The platforms coming out from the payment terminals are moving up a level. And there's a lot of very interesting things that you can actually do on payment terminals, which really gives you the opportunity to adapt to new solutions. Get prepared for the future, have the right equipment into place so when new things come out, you'll be ready to actually accept them.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Doug. That was very
Yep.
informative. I'm sure this information will spark many internal conversations amongst our attendees, just to ensure that their parking operations and organizations as a whole are prepared for these upcoming mandates. So thank you for that. I'm happy to hand it off to Cynthia from here to highlight several questions you should be asking your parking provider to help set your organization up for success.
Thanks, Gas, and thanks, Doug. So really, just in closing, this is our last slide. We've just listed a few of the questions that we think parking owners and operators should be asking their parking technology partners to make sure that when you're evaluating your parking operation, that it's as financially safe and secure as possible. So we're talking about questions about, making sure that they're up to date with their PCI compliance. What do they have by way of internal processes and protocols about cash handling? Whether it be, at the head office where the cash counting is or at individual sites, do they have CSAE audits or do they participate in some other type of voluntary process, and how they stay up to date with their financial mandates. So there's some great questions here. We encourage you to have a conversation with your parking technology partner.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was an insightful way to end off today's discussion. So once again, if you enjoyed the webinar and think that we should continue hosting educational events online, we encourage you to let us know by leaving us a Google star rating. So we'll leave this up on the screen for a few moments to give you an opportunity to scan. Alrighty, so I'm sure that our speakers today have sparked many questions about financial compliance as a whole and upcoming mandates. So with that being said, we will now be addressing all of your questions in the chat, starting with a question from Jim. So this is to Doug. How can we find out if our hardware payment equipment needs to be updated? Would software updates suffice?
Yeah, good question. Maybe a bit of a complicated answer. So the first place I would look at is your PCI level on the devices, and see when you bought them, what the PCI rating is on them or compliance is with them. And so the further back you are, the more likely you are to be ready to change it. So right now, PCI 5.x and PCI 6.x are the devices that are rolling out into the field. So I would start with there, and then looking at some of the other features and stuff that might be into the software. Again, if you can find out if you support MSD transactions and stuff, your provider would have to tell you that. Would software just be the way up? Potentially, if the devices are current enough. But if they're old and at I'll call it an old PCI level, you can't fix PCI levels with software because there are a lot of physical things into it. So likely, if you have older hardware, you're going to be looking at actually upgrading to a newer device.
Awesome, thanks, Doug. We have a few more questions for you, a few from Ryan. So the first being, can you explain the fraud liability shift and how that introduces risk to the hospital if we're not compliant with the mandate?
Absolutely. So I talked about it a couple different places in here. Starting with just whether your device is going to accept EMV, and that was several years ago. But what you'll find is there are tools that the card brands put out that help you push the fraud liability back on the card brand. So probably 3DS is the best example of the most current, where on e-com transactions, if you run 3DS, then you can say, look, you told me, Mr. Issuer, that this card was good. And so if it comes back as fraud later, you go back to the card brands and go, no, sorry, you told me this was a good card. So that's the latest I would say on fraud liability shift. Same thing though, I guess, on MSD and things like that, on contactless, that if you're accepting older technologies, they push the fraud liability onto the merchants to force them forward. So the risk is you get chargebacks or lost transactions because of fraud, or maybe somebody's used a fraudulent card and you just don't get the money, or they've used somebody else's card and they come back to you with a chargeback and you go, hey, you weren't properly validating this card, so therefore it's your problem that this transaction was not valid, and you have to take the loss on it.
Awesome. And also, so Ryan is aware that as of October 2023, a 15-cent transaction fee will be applied on all transactions from terminals that don't support EMV. Will there be a point in time where MSD is completely phased out and no longer accepted?
So I will say yes. MSD, whether it's the physical stripe on the card or MSD built into a contactless transaction, is an old technology, declining technology. So it leads to when cards are issued, because they're kind of the leader in whether those cards are going to be in the field or not. But you will find there will be a time in the future where those things will be just turned off, and you won't have MSD cards available to you as a consumer. And then therefore on the terminals, you don't really care, because as long as you can take the latest and greatest, then you will be able to process a transaction. But if you haven't upgraded your terminal to take EMV, for example, you'll find that a customer will come up and they won't have a mag stripe on their card, and therefore they're not going to be able to do a payment on your terminal.
Awesome. And one final question for you, Doug. So just to confirm, Dave is asking, parking meters will need to be upgraded to EMV by April 1st, 2023 for MasterCard, and October October 1st, 2023 for Visa to avoid the 15-cent fee?
Yep, that mandate is out there. It is looming on us. And right now there are currently no exceptions to the rule. So I would say that we need to be prepared for it. The challenge in the payment industry is, sometimes you can get waivers. The waivers are completely decided by the card brands. So you can sometimes ask, but when mandates have been out for a long time, the card brands aren't very receptive to asking for extensions. They said, you've been knowing this for X number of years, you should try and stay compliant.
Awesome, thank you, Doug. So if there aren't any further questions, I'll give people a few more moments just in case any last minute questions come up. But again, thank you to both the speakers and attendees for an insightful discussion on the current financial processing landscape and upcoming compliance mandates. Just to let you all know, we will be following up with an email that you can respond to if any other questions do arise, as well as a recording of today's webinar. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Cassandra. Thanks, Doug.